The lecture hall at Columbia University buzzed with energy as students settled into their seats. It was a political science class known for sparking heated debates, and today was no exception. Among the students was Barron Trump, a freshman who had chosen this course despite knowing his last name could draw unwanted attention. The professor, Dr. Richard Calloway, was a well-known critic of the Trump family. With a smirk, he began the lecture by discussing the influence of First Ladies in American politics. But instead of focusing on their achievements, he took a sharp jab at Melania Trump. Apart from standing around in designer dresses, what did she actually do? He quipped, prompting laughter from the class. Barron, who had been quietly listening, felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't just a casual remark. It was a direct insult to his mother. The room fell silent as Barron straightened in his seat, ready to respond. The tension was palpable, and everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. Barron had always been a quiet student, preferring to listen rather than speak up. But this time, something inside him snapped. He couldn't let the professor's mocking comments go unchallenged. As the laughter died down, Barron raised his hand, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, Professor," he said. "I'd like to respond to that." The room went completely silent. Dr. Calloway, surprised by Barron's sudden assertiveness, raised an eyebrow and gestured for him to continue. All eyes were on Barron as he prepared to defend his mother. The atmosphere was electric, and no one knew what to expect next. Barron took a deep breath, his heart pounding, but his voice remained calm and controlled. "With all due respect, Professor," he began, "if we're going to discuss First Ladies, we should do it with facts, not personal attacks." A few students murmured in agreement, while others leaned forward, eager to see how this would unfold. Dr. Calloway, clearly caught off guard, tried to maintain his composure. "Oh, I'm all about facts, Mr. Trump," he said with a condescending chuckle. "So please, enlighten us. What exactly did your mother accomplish that was so significant?" Barron didn't back down. He started by highlighting Melania's Be Best initiative, which focused on children's well-being, online safety, and opioid abuse prevention. She traveled across the country and even internationally to promote these causes, Barron explained. She visited hospitals, spent time with children suffering from neonatal abstinence syndrome, and personally met with tech giants to advocate for better online protections for kids. The professor's smirk wavered slightly, but he quickly countered, "Every First Lady has a cause. But let's be honest, Melania was nothing more than a figurehead. She barely spoke in public and rarely took questions." Barron nodded, unfazed. "She speaks 5 languages fluently," he replied. "Can we really call someone uninformed when they can communicate with world leaders in multiple languages?" A murmur rippled through the class. Dr. Calloway hesitated for a moment before responding. "Being multilingual doesn't mean she made an impact. She wasn't exactly Michelle Obama." Barron smiled slightly, ready for this comparison. "True, she wasn't Michelle Obama," he said calmly. "Just like Michelle Obama wasn't Nancy Reagan, and Nancy Reagan wasn't Eleanor Roosevelt. Every First Lady has her own style of influence. My mother didn't seek the spotlight the way some others did, but that doesn't mean she was ineffective." The room was completely silent now. Even students who had laughed earlier were paying close attention. Barron's calm and logical defense had shifted the energy in the room, and everyone could sense that the professor was starting to feel the pressure. But Barron wasn't finished yet. He had more to say, and he was determined to make his point clear. The debate was far from over. The tension in the room was thick as Barron continued his defense. Dr. Calloway, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the discussion was taking, tried to regain control. "All right, Barron," he said, folding his arms. "Let's say Melania had a noble cause, but impact is measured by results. What real change did she bring?" Barron didn't hesitate. "You mean results like raising awareness about cyberbullying at a time when online harassment was at an all-time high?" he countered. "She stood up against social media toxicity, even when people mocked her for it." A few heads nodded in the room. It was ironic. Some of the same students who had ridiculed Melania's campaign against cyberbullying were now listening intently as Barron defended it. He continued, "She worked with the Department of Health and Human Services to help children affected by the opioid crisis. She visited border facilities to highlight the conditions of migrant children and pushed for better humanitarian efforts. And let's not forget, she was the only First Lady to ever speak at the United Nations about the well-being of children worldwide." Dr. Calloway adjusted his stance, clearly struggling to find a response. "All right, she had some involvement," he admitted. "But let's be real. Most of her influence came from being married to a powerful man. Would anyone care about her if she wasn't Mrs. Trump?" Barron exhaled sharply, suppressing a smile. He had been waiting for this argument. "That's an interesting point, Professor," he said. "But by that logic, shouldn't we dismiss every First Lady's work? Would Eleanor Roosevelt have been a humanitarian icon if she weren't FDR's wife? Would Jackie Kennedy have become a cultural icon if she hadn't been married to JFK?" The room was completely still. Even students who had been typing on their laptops stopped to watch the exchange unfold. Barron's words had struck a chord. He wasn't just defending his mother. He was challenging the entire class to think critically about how First Ladies are judged. Barron leaned forward slightly, his voice firm but calm. "Let's take my mother out of the equation for a second," he said. "Let's talk about something else. Respect. We're in a university, a place of higher learning. Shouldn't we be analyzing policies, not mocking accents? Shouldn't we be looking at initiatives, not personal attacks?" A few students exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Calloway's smirk had completely disappeared. He opened his mouth to respond, but Barron wasn't finished. "My mother has been called a gold digger, an airhead, and worse, just because she wasn't a typical politician's wife. And you know what's funny? The same people who claim to support women's empowerment are the first to tear her down." The room was silent. Even Dr. Calloway seemed at a loss for words. Barron had turned the tables, and the class was now hanging on his every word. The professor cleared his throat, trying to brush off the moment. "All right, Mr. Trump," he said, forcing a casual tone. "Let's move on." But everyone knew this discussion wasn't over. Barron had made an impression that no one would forget. As the lecture ended, students began packing up their bags, but the atmosphere in the room remained tense. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging glances with Barron as they filed out. Others stole quick looks at Dr. Calloway, who busied himself with his notes, pretending as though nothing unusual had just happened. Barron grabbed his backpack and stood up, fully aware of the murmurs around him. He knew this moment would spread beyond the classroom, maybe even beyond the university. Just as he stepped into the hallway, a voice called out behind him. "Hey, Barron!" He turned to see Sophia Reynolds, a political science major known for being outspoken in debates. "That was impressive," she admitted, catching up to him. "I don't agree with all your points, but you handled yourself better than most people would in that situation." Barron nodded. "I wasn't looking for a debate," he said. "But when people attack my mother without basis, I won't stay silent." Sophia smiled slightly. "I get that. But you realize Calloway won't let this go, right? Barron shrugged. That's his problem, not mine. Just then, another student approached, James Harper, a self-proclaimed progressive who had often criticized the Trump family in class. Barron braced himself for an argument, but James surprised him. You made some fair points back there, James admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I still don't like your dad, but you weren't wrong about the hypocrisy and how people treat Melania. Barron studied him for a moment, sensing sincerity in his voice. I appreciate that, he said. Sophia smirked. Looks like you're winning over some unlikely fans. Barron chuckled. Not here to win fans, just to stand up for the truth. Before they could continue, a shadow loomed over them. Dr. Calloway had stepped into the hallway, his expression unreadable. Mr. Trump, he said smoothly, a word? Barron exchanged a quick glance with Sophia before nodding. Sure. As students walked past, whispering about what had just transpired, Barron followed Dr. Calloway into his office. He knew the real conversation was about to begin. Dr. Calloway's office was lined with shelves of political theory books, framed certificates, and a small collection of photos with past students. The professor leaned against his desk, studying Barron with a measured expression. Close the door, Calloway instructed. Barron did as he was told, then stood firmly, waiting for what was next. You surprised me today, Calloway admitted, tapping his fingers on the desk. Most students crumble when put on the spot. But you actually had some good arguments. Barron remained silent, unsure if this was a compliment or a prelude to another attack. Calloway sighed. Look, I don't regret challenging you. That's my job. But I'll admit, I may have gone too far in mocking your mother's accent. That wasn't my finest moment. Barron raised an eyebrow. You think? Calloway chuckled, shaking his head. I suppose I walked right into that one. His expression turned serious. But I wasn't entirely wrong either. First ladies, especially those in modern politics, are judged on their ability to communicate and rally people behind causes. And let's be honest, Melania Trump wasn't exactly a powerhouse in that regard. Barron leaned forward slightly. Or maybe people just didn't want to hear her. If Michelle Obama had launched Be Best, the media would have celebrated it. But because it was Melania, they dismissed it before giving it a chance. Calloway exhaled, considering his words. You really believe that? I know it, Barron replied. My mother didn't seek the limelight, and she didn't play the political game the way others did. That doesn't mean she lacked impact. It just means people refused to acknowledge it. The professor folded his arms. You're passionate about this, more than I expected. I'm passionate about fairness, Barron corrected. You're a professor at one of the best universities in the country. You shape young minds, and instead of presenting a balanced discussion, you took the easy route. Mockery. Calloway looked at him for a long moment before nodding. All right, Mr. Trump, he said. You've made your point, so here's my challenge to you. Barron crossed his arms. I'm listening. You clearly think your mother's legacy is misunderstood, Calloway said. Fine, prove it. Write a research paper, 3,000 words, arguing why Melania Trump should be recognized as an impactful First Lady. Use credible sources, policy analysis, and compare her to past First Ladies. If you make a strong enough case, I'll admit in front of the class that I misjudged her. Barron smirked. You're serious? Completely, Calloway replied, extending his hand. Are you up for it? Barron didn't hesitate. He shook the professor's hand firmly. Challenge accepted. Barron left Dr. Calloway's office with a sense of determination burning inside him. The challenge wasn't just about proving a point in class, It was about setting the record straight. His mother's legacy had been downplayed, ridiculed, and misrepresented for years. This was his chance to counter the narrative with facts, not opinions. Later that evening, he sat in his dorm room, surrounded by a laptop, notebooks, and stacks of articles he had printed out. He had a task ahead of him, 3,000 words to make a case that even Dr. Calloway couldn't dismiss. He began by breaking down Melania Trump's tenure as First Lady into key areas: the Be Best initiative, cyberbullying and social media awareness, the opioid crisis, her international influence, and comparisons with other First Ladies. Barron started digging into White House archives, news articles, and government reports. He found statistics showing that the Be Best campaign had reached millions of children through partnerships with schools and tech organizations. He read transcripts of her speeches and compared them to how other First Ladies were covered in the media. One thing became clear: his mother's efforts hadn't failed. They had been ignored. As he typed his opening paragraph, his phone buzzed. It was Sophia. "Hey, still up?" she asked. "Yeah, working on the paper," Barron replied. "I was thinking, if you really want to make a case, you should interview someone who worked with her. Get insider insight." Barron paused. "That's not a bad idea." "I can help," Sophia said. "I have a contact who worked at the White House during her time." "Want me to set something up?" "Definitely," Barron said. 2 days later, Barron sat in a quiet cafe, waiting for the call. Sophia had pulled through. Her contact was Sarah Whitmore, a former communications aide in the East Wing during Melania Trump's tenure. When his phone buzzed, he answered immediately. "Miss Whitmore, this is Barron Trump." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Wow, I have to admit, I didn't expect this call." "I appreciate you taking the time," Barron said. "I'm working on a research paper about my mother's contributions as First Lady, and I want first-hand insight from someone who was there." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then said, "I'd be happy to help. But let me be honest with you, Barron, your mother was one of the most misunderstood First Ladies in history. People assumed she was cold or uninvolved just because she wasn't a politician." Barron leaned forward, intrigued. What was she really like behind the scenes? Sarah didn't hold back. She was focused. Every initiative she took on, she personally invested time in. I was in meetings where she demanded actual results, not just press releases. When she worked on the opioid crisis, she spoke directly to recovering addicts and medical professionals. When she advocated for online safety, she pushed tech executives harder than some senators did. But the media never cared to cover that side of her. Barron frowned. "Why do you think that was?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Politics. She didn't fit the media's preferred narrative. If she had been a Democrat's wife, they would have praised her for tackling social media toxicity. But because she was married to your father, they mocked her accent and called her a hypocrite. The truth is, she genuinely cared about protecting children from the dangers of the modern world." Barron took notes rapidly, absorbing every word. "What's something about her work that most people don't know?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Here's something no one talks about. She personally wrote letters to parents who lost children to opioid overdoses. She didn't announce it publicly, didn't do it for PR. She just did it because she cared." Barron felt a lump in his throat. He had known his mother was compassionate, but hearing it from an outsider made it even more real. Sarah continued, "She visited child welfare centers without cameras. She read reports on cyberbullying well into the night. And let me tell you something, she wasn't afraid to challenge her own team when she thought they weren't doing enough." Barron exhaled, processing everything. Would you be willing to go on record about this? Sarah hesitated, then said, I'll give you a statement you can quote. But be prepared. Your professor may not like what you find. Barron smirked. That's fine. The truth isn't about what he likes. As he ended the call, he realized something. He wasn't just proving his mother's impact. He was reclaiming her legacy.